You are listening to the Case Closed Podcast, a very special episode of the Case Closed Podcast. I'm your host, Professor C. I want to welcome everybody to this really special episode. We got a very wonderful opportunity to sit down and interview Joe Murray. Obviously, Joe has done a lot of work, not just in anime, but in voiceover work in general, and worked on quite a few English dubs back in the day, in the early 2000s. Got a chance to work on Detective Conan, One Piece, and a host of other animes as well. Also, the very, very first English voice of Shinichi Kudo and Conan Edogawa in English. In part one, we talk a lot about the business side of anime and the business of how these dubs are done and recorded, especially what it was like in the early 2000s, around 2003, recording Detective Conan. So sit back. We really hope you enjoy part one of this interview. And of course, like, subscribe, comment, all that. We'd love to hear from you. Hopefully we can have part two for you as well here in the next week or two. Obviously, we're doing a lot of extra work on the fan dub side of everything right now, trying to push that as well. But we will have part two of this interview for you very soon. So sit back and enjoy, and we'll talk to you soon. I'd spoke with several people that worked there, and they said, it's a great property, but it doesn't make any money.
Yeah.
Not that it doesn't make any money. What they said is that the cost of the license is so much that the show would have to overperform. Like, it would have to be one of our best sellers or top sellers in order to keep it. So not that it necessarily sold poorly, but it didn't sell up to the cost of the license.
Yeah.
The films did, they said, but the series itself did not. So TMS Entertainment, who licenses the show in Japan, well, they have a
Yep.
U.S. Region
Distribution.
distribution, yeah. And now they have the license, and they're starting to bring out movies, and they've licensed Bang Zoom Entertainment, basically record that audio for those films. And the 22nd movie for the series premiered in English at a convention over the summer, but it hasn't gotten a U.S. physical release, and it was leaked on an Asia streaming service of some sort.
I think if it's the same movie that I was somewhat aware of, I believe it was actually premiered in Singapore. But then again, it could be another movie that they recently produced in the Detective Conan canon that actually took place, or at least the story was supposed to take place in Singapore. But I only know that because I was in Singapore recently and I saw something relating to that. But obviously, I don't follow this anymore.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I'm glad guys like you do, because obviously there's a significant level of interest and there's a decent fan base to support it. It's interesting that you said that Funimation got the license to do the dub for the U.S. market as far back as 2003, because that's actually when we did the dub, if I'm not wrong, 2002, 2003. We did the first dub with, I think it was Odex.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who actually got the limited license, but it was only for distribution in Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia,
Wow,
right?
okay.
And the thing that really got it started, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, so tell me if you want to approach this in another way, but since it's on my mind, I'll just relate it. What got it started was they were deregulating media in Singapore, or at least experimenting with the idea of, because this is all state-run, right? So you have something called Singapore Press Holdings, which owns all the TV stations, of which these are free to air now. This is pre-cable. So they had actually introduced competition to the single state-run free to air English channel. Okay. And they I think it was called MediaWorks. And MediaWorks had another channel which was given to them to have kind of like a duopoly in entertainment on regular free-to-air television. So these guys were starving for content, and they cut a deal with the Japanese as well as with Odex, or some earlier version of Odex, to produce this stuff for immediate airing on the new TV channel. And that's one of the reasons why it was such a hectic production, is because we had to get it done. 52 episodes had to be done very, very quickly so that it could quickly go on air. Detective Conan was not released on VCD.
Okay.
However, at least the Singapore English dub. However, it was broadcast on free-to-air television, and I do have several of the episodes when we were in the QC stage of editing and proofing. I did steal them and put them on DVD.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I'd love to see that sometime. I really would.
Well, I think you saw some excerpts from that on that interview clip that you got from my Vimeo channel, right?
Yeah, I saw a little bit, and I saw that you not only, and this was fascinating to me, Joe, because I've never heard of this. You voiced Shinichi Kudo and Conan Edogawa.
Yes, yes.
That is interesting. That's very interesting. Because every dub that I've tracked down for Conan, whether it's Chinese, Spanish, Vietnamese, Japanese dub, which I watch now with subtitles, um, they never approached the character that way. Did you?
Mm.
What was your feeling about, because in the excerpt interview that you sent me,
Yeah.
you auditioned for both, but did they ask you to do that, or is that something you wanted to do, or did they require that?
Well, I think we were so budget constrained that everything was pretty much down to economies of scale. And since I was able to do a higher version of the same character, well, I mean, I made it slightly different, and of course they applied some pitching to it to kick it up a notch in terms of register, right? To differentiate the teenage voice. Now, the teenage voice of Shinichi only appears in the first couple of episodes, and then everything is Conan, right, as a kid. Now, there are a couple of flashbacks, if I remember right, where I had to go back into the teenage voice, but for the majority of the production, I was Conan Edogawa.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, the small little voice clips I've heard of Shinichi, I kind of feel like Funimation used that to a little degree, because when, Jerry Jewell, who ended up becoming Shinichi Kudo, or Jimmy Kudo as they called him in the States,
Right.
I feel there's some influence from your performance to a degree in his performance, and maybe some influence in that. What were scripts like?
Yeah, let me kind of get to that question after I address your first point, which was to the scripts.
I went round and about with that last.
No, that's okay. Before we touched on scripts, you were asking
about voicing both. I was.
We touched on that, and then somewhere in between. Oh, did Funimation? You said that you thought Funimation.
I thought Funimation. I thought that your Shinichi Kudo voice
might have been influenced. Might have influenced what Funimation did.
Right, and Jerry Jewell.
That's a very important question, because I was not even aware that Funimation knew of the existence of the Singapore dub. I have no way of knowing one way or the other, but I just presupposed that they were not given it by the distributor. But you could be right. They could have said, "Hey, look, this is what we did." Real quick and dirty in Singapore, but I really don't know. I don't know, because a lot of people just really never heard of the Singapore dub, and then you have these intense detectives that have been doing digging and saying, "Hey, because you've seen some of the websites, right? There are quite a few websites on Conan, and then if you look into some of the fan input, a lot of people were completely unaware that there ever was a Singapore dub of that show. Similarly with One Piece, because they were done around the same time, right? And of course, One Piece has a much broader fan base and is far more popular and well known than Detective Conan. Now, to get to your second question about the scripts, in all of the cases, in every Japanese anime dub that I've been involved with, I think there are 5 or 6 that I've actually participated in, including some more serious ones like Zepong, which was about World War II. All the scripts are translated by the IP owner, and then kind of dumped on the studio to figure out what to do with. In most cases, the scripts were in pretty rough shape, and a lot of improvising had to be done on the spot, of course, because it's all about making certain that you voice match and lip sync, right? So quite often the scripts as given are poorly translated, number one. Number two, they generally don't fit the lip sync because they were never translated for that purpose, right? It's just some academic doing a straight Japanese to English translation. So the nuances in terms of whatever humor is in there, or whatever we have to do to massage the lines in order to get the lip sync to work, is pretty much done on the spot, impromptu, in the booth. So in the case of Detective Conan, as well as the other ones that I did, it was a lot, even more so farther down the line when it was no longer voiceovers unlimited, but it became Odex, and we did the Zepong series. Wow, we spent literally hours trying out different versions of the lines in order to match up the lip sync and get the lip sync as tight as possible, because that was done expressly for the U.S. market in the case of Zepong. And that was one of the reasons why I bowed out of anime dubbing, because it's too much work, and the budgets, at least as they were presented to Singapore, were simply not worth it. They just didn't compensate you enough for the amount of work involved. So you only did it, or at least in my case, I only did it because I enjoyed it, number one. Number two, I was friends with the guys who were trying to make the whole thing work. This is later on now. Zepong was later there was a bit of a hiatus for me in terms of Japanese dubbing, and then Zippon came in much later. So the budgets were higher, and the objective was to expressly create this for distribution in the U.S., which ultimately, I think this was Toei Animation, if I'm not wrong. Toei did Zippon, TMS did Detective Conan, but they were aware of the Singapore version, so I went over and I was speaking to them, and then from that initial contact, I actually got a deal with them to do a documentary series called World Heritage, which I personally directed and had to completely rescript. Talk about poor Japanese scripts. These scripts were pathetic. But this was factual content, and the footage was very good. And it was a 25 episode series of all the World Heritage sites, across the globe, that each one got its own 30-minute episode. But the scripts were pathetic because there was maybe 5 minutes of narration. I said, it's a 30-minute episode, and your narrator doesn't say anything. I mean, you got to flesh this out. So I wound up rewriting all their scripts, and then for minimal compensation, but simply to do justice to the whole thing, because I wanted to get that Studio Bizarro company on the map in terms of being able to do this kind of work, but economically it just wasn't there. But that was also TMS, so they don't just distribute anime; they distribute other Japanese content as well.
They've been around a long time too.
Right.
They have a long history. I mean, it's fascinating because I had heard, I believe I've heard your Shinichi Kudo in the past, because I believe on YouTube at one point there was a longer clip of episode 1, but somebody had labeled it as an alternative Funimation dub, which obviously isn't the case.
I don't think I've seen that. I don't think I've ever seen that.
And somebody labeled it that way, but I don't think that they knew that it was actually the Singapore dub. And Voiceovers Unlimited, based on the research I've done, they've since ceased.
Oh, they're gone. Yeah. Well, they were actually, see if I remember this right, Voiceovers Unlimited was a subsidiary of Odex. They set it up expressly for this purpose, and I think they might have given a piece of that to Chuck Powers, who was the guy that they recruited to direct the Singapore English dub of Detective Conan, for starters. And then he wound up doing also several other anime productions as well. Again, all for the same channel, for that Channel 8, which eventually folded, by the way. Oh. And then I think it went to a cable. Some of it went to a cable channel that was set up for Asia called Animax, which I think is still in existence. I don't know who owns it, though, now. I don't know that it was picked up by one of the big studios, but Animax was like a 24-hour cable channel that offered nothing but Japanese anime.
I believe they are still around. I think I've heard of them as well. That's amazing. Okay. So it sounds like you guys had, it sounds like they had a lot of TV deals for the Singapore dub already going and actively working. So that's very interesting. How many characters would you say you voiced in the Detective Conan Singapore dub, if you had to think back? I know it's been a long time.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty handy in terms of being able to do incidental characters. In every production I've been involved with, I'm always given additional characters because I can do different voices, right? So I would say a fair amount. Some of the villains, there were a couple of villains. I think there's even a clip of one in that interview thing that I sent you.
There is, I saw it was in
some guy kidnapped a little girl or something. I forget, some nasty guy, and I just did some villain voice for him, which was not just that one-off thing. He was throughout the whole episode. Some of these guys were pretty significant incidental characters, but they're just unique to a given episode.
Yeah, and the studio felt like you could change up your voice enough where they knew it wasn't the same person voicing.
Right.
That's good.
I mean, the standards, to be honest, Frank, the standards were not. What happened was, it was just such a mad dash to get the stuff done.
Yeah.
And Chuck Powers, who directed and voiced, he voiced a couple of the characters as well. I think he voiced Inspector. Wait a minute. What was the Nan? Was that her name? Her father was a detective also.
Yeah, Detective Moore.
Maury. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
and Conan was basically stealing his stealing his gig, right? Because he kept solving all the cases and he was getting all pissed off. So Chuck did that guy, but he doesn't appear. I don't remember now. It's been a long time, but I don't think he appears steadily throughout the whole series. He's sort of intermittent. And then the other guy that was a frequent voice actor, or he did a lot of characters repeatedly, was Brian Zimmerman. So these two guys were the guys that were already part of the, I think I might have discussed that in that video where I explained the audition. So Brian and Chuck were already on board. I don't know how those two guys came together, but when I was pulled in rather late, somebody had tipped me off. It was very strange too, because I was in a band at the time, and the chick singer in the band said, "Hey, they're auditioning for some Japanese anime thing. You might want to look into that," because she knew that I was doing promos for Disney at the time, right? So I was doing some children's related TV, right? So I said, yeah, sure. So I went to that. That's, and the rest of it I think is told in that video. But yeah, that's where I met Chuck and Brian, both of whom were, in fact, Chuck came to Singapore expressly for this purpose. If I'm not wrong, they recruited him to come in and do this and set up this VoiceOvers Unlimited thing. I don't know whether they gave him any equity in that. I doubt it. But they did, if I'm not wrong, they actually contributed to his relocation expenses and such. So this was his purpose. This was his reason for being for like 2 years, was to get all this anime stuff done. So the budgets were pretty tight. It was all about cranking it out as quickly as possible. In fact, in preparation for our call, I researched in my own archives some written interviews that I had done. Most of it was about One Piece, though, and I was refreshing my memory that part of the reason why I got frustrated with it was the quality just started to go down the toilet, because they were just trying to really rush to meet production schedules. And, I'm a bit fastidious, and I'd say, no, let me do another take. No, let me try this. They go, we don't have time. Let's just go. It was all about getting it done rather than getting it done well. So I kind of didn't agree with that approach, but I understood that was their priority, was just meeting schedules.